Hello and welcome. In today's lesson, we are going to handle forms, the HTML forms, and forms being a very foundational concept in web development. So with forms, we can take user input. We want the user to interact with different web pages, and through that we can use their inputs to just provision all that to them. They want to send some data, they want to retrieve some data, so that's why forms come in very critical and very essential. So on this we are going to handle form tags and input types. We're going to look at labels and buttons, different types of buttons. Those are check buttons. We are also going to look at radio buttons, all those form validation. We are going to look at how to submit form data. So without much ado, let's dive in and just get started. I have a file I've created called forms.html. So in my forms.html, I'll just start off by creating a boilerplate of our HTML document. So on that, let's just change the title to what we are learning. We are learning forms. Yeah, I can call it HTML forms. So we're doing HTML forms, and then we can jump into the body of it and just get started. So form is created by the form tag. So you use the form tag to just set up your form, and then you add the attribute of action. This just tells where you are submitting, where you want to get your form to when you do like a submit. So this one I'll have like on the action I'll just say /submit. Then another attribute I'll add there is a method. So form takes a method. So the method which is how are you submitting the form? Are you doing a post method? Are you doing a get method? For instance, here we just want to send the form to our web service somewhere. So in the form tag, now the form elements or content now comes here. So that is where now we put our form element. I can just add a comment and say form elements go here. Then we can now start off with now looking at, we said we are going to look at labels, we're going to look at inputs and all that. So let's start off with a label. So we just use the tag label. So you identify this label is going to be used for what. So for instance, here we just want to have a username. We want to add a username. So you just give the label. This is what the text that is going, the labels tag just holds the text that is going to display in the user interface. So if I do that and just say user name, then just that. So to check and understand how the label works, when you go live, you can see you have that label there. That's the label for the username. And we can now add an input field, so where the name is going to be inputted. So we use an input. So the input, we add an attribute of the type of input we are having. So like for instance, the username is just text, so your input will be text. and we can add the name of the input is just let me just call it name, and then the ID can be our username. And we talked about validation, so I'll be covering all these aspects as we move. So validation is basically having a way to do checks on your document as your user, or rather the one interacting with the form inputs data. There can be situations when they forget certain fields, so you just want to have checks on the fields so that whenever the user inputs some details, there are fields which are not missed out. So one way of reminding the user that this field is you've left out this field is using the attribute required. So whenever the user tries to just submit the form without having filled some input areas with the required attribute on it, it's a validation checker that just returns the user to that area and tells these fields need to be filled. That is one way to do the validation. Then another way is adding what we call patterns. So just adding a pattern, and this takes in we call it a regular expression. So regular expressions are just ways of doing checks. So you just define a pattern of characters which need to be followed, so that you don't just input anything. So it must have a certain order. So for instance, we can do a check on letters. So A to Z. So it must have any of the 26 capital letter characters, and then A to Z, which are small letter characters. It can do checks on those, and also we can now have a check on numbers. And for this now, here we can we can have a limiter. So a delimiter of the minimum and maximum characters, or number of characters, yes, that a name should have. So our username should not be less than 3 characters and should not be more than 10 characters. We just pass it that way, and then that one will do that checker on the pattern of how the user is inputting the name. And also now, when the user hasn't inputted the correct order of whatever you are checked with the pattern, you can have a title of what this one just returns a textual field that tells the users what needs to be done. So for instance, here we can say username should be 3 to 10 characters, just what we've encoded in the pattern. So 3 to 10, 3 to 10. Can use letters long, so I can just have that. So that is a checker on that field, and I think with that we are done. So that takes the field, and we can now try out and see what we are talking about. And for us to check out that, because we have the action submit, we need a button that will trigger that submit on the form. So another type of input is we can make an input area to be a button, and for that we just do the submit type is not the submit, the input type is submit. We just say submit, and we can here IntelliSense just capturing that for me. We add a value. We add the value on the submit button, and the value still will be submit, and we don't need an ID on that, so we just do that, and then we have our form, so we can check out what we are doing. You see we have an input field where now if I pass in a single value, try to submit, sorry, this one is trying to submit, which shouldn't be now. Okay, so if I try to submit that, I should get the checker, the validator should tell me now this field requires that you do fill in according to what we have just encoded in the validation. So for that, let's check out again and see. So we have our input, we submit. So if I do, let me just do like more than 10, let me try out and see. Okay, because we don't have place where we're submitting that will now be it for now. Then we can get to see another type of input. So we've looked at the input field, which is text. So we can look at another input, which is for email. So we can have an email. So here we can say we can start off with a label again. So label for email. And here we can write and say email. And then we can now have our input. So the input type is email. The name will also be email. And the ID will also be just email. We've talked about the validation checker of required, so we can have this as a required field. So you don't submit without having filled in the email. And for an email field, you'll see automatically it must have an @ sign. When you try to submit an email field without having the @ sign on it, so if I try to submit, it tells me fill out this field. If I fill out that field and then now submit, you can see it tells me must include an @ sign. So that is a validation for email, and you see works verified. So if I add that and just do a submit, you can see now the form is submitted. So it is just okay. Now we can now go to another validation. We can check out, we have done text, we have done email, and then we can look at password. So another input we talk about is a password. So we can have the labeled form and say password. So that's a label for password, and then pass in the text password. Then we can now have the input. We have said the input is password. So the password input, you'll see the difference with the text and email and how it is displaying whatever we pass in. So we can just say that is also password, and ID can also be password. So once we have that, now with that input field, let's test and see. So you can see we have a password field. So try to pass in some data. You can see we only see those dots there, with basically just masking whatever inputs the user is adding there. And basically passwords are never meant to be seen by anyone, so that is how you can just do that. So it obscures everything from the users. Okay, that is to do with password. I think I've missed out on required. We can also have it as a required field so that it doesn't end up being a field that doesn't have anything in it. So just mark it as required. And then we can also go to another field that takes in number. So a number input. So a number input we can use, we can start off also with the label. And for instance here, let's take, or rather check, we want the user to just enter their age. So here I can say age and then just pass in the age here. Then we can now have the number input. So the type is number. So the type of input here is number. The attribute, another attribute here, we can still just have it as age. That is the name. Then the ID is still the same, age. So on number inputs, the validation we can add on this is setting the minimum and maximum number we want to be by default. So let's say we want, this is an application we are setting up for adults only. So we can set a minimum age, a minimum of, let's say, 18 and above. So if a user is inputting a value which is less than 18, so basically this one is not an adult. So we set up, and then we can set a maximum value. We can set a maximum of the number to be picked there. So we can even set it as at 100. Also mark this field as required. Once we have that, when you check it out in your browser, you should be having a good input there. So you can see by default, when I click on it, you see by default it's giving me 18. So I can't input anything less than 18. So if I just let me just refresh the page, have it that way, and then input any number which is not 18. So of course this field will ask me to fill in some detail, and then I'll fill in that again. So let me just pick something like that, and then do a submit. So value must be greater than or equal to 18. So you can see you cannot have values which are less than the set minimum. So you can see how the validation is working very, very fine with that, and then we can now continue. We can also look at, so we've looked at text inputs, we have looked at email inputs, and we have looked at password inputs, and we have looked at number inputs. Those are basically the 4 input areas that are very key and essential in forms. Another key thing in forms, we talked about buttons. So we can now bring in buttons. So talk about buttons. So on buttons, I'll start off with the radio buttons. And with radio buttons, they only allow you to select a single element in a given list. So let me just have a comment here and say radio buttons. On the radio buttons, let's just start off with like a p tag. Here we want a user to, let's say, select their gender. So on gender, so the text here will just be gender. Sorry, it will just be gender. And then we can now have the input. So an input for radio. So the type, you'll see the type now becomes, let me also start off with label. So that is label from, say we are starting with male, then bring in the name, sorry, We can now have the name of the um, input. The name can just be, we are taking male, so the name can just be that male, and then we take it as male. Let's have it as gender because they are selecting gender. So the male, the name is gender, and then we now add another attribute here of value. So for the value for us here now will be the one that will be used to toggle between which has been chosen and which hasn't been chosen. So you just add the value. So for this one, the value will be male because this one is selecting the male gender. Where am I adding that? Oh, sorry. I'm talking about the input, and now I'm adding this on the label. Sorry. The label for male, we should have added male here. Sorry, I'm going too fast in my mind. So with that, then we can now bring the input. So the input type is just radio. So the type is radio, and then we have the name. The name we've said is it's going to be gender, and then the ID can be we can say ID is male, and then we can pass in say now the value I've been talking about. The value is now male. We are selecting the male gender. Then we can now go to female gender. So just duplicate this and have my female gender. So here I'll just change this to female. Change this to female. So I'll start there and say this one is female. So I have my female gender and male gender, so which is done just well. So when we check that out, you can be able to see. So you can see male. I can select that. I can select female. So you can see they are checking out very well. So those are radio buttons. Then the next thing we can look at is now the another input type, which is now not radio button, sorry, which is now a checkbox. So checkboxes. So that is the next input type we look at. So that is checkbox. With the checkbox, we also just set off from where we have done. And now the difference between radio buttons and checkbox is with the checkbox you can select multiple elements or items from a given list. So for this we can bring in a use case of user interests. So the interests of the user. So we can just start off with a tag and say we want to talk about the interests of the user. What is this user interested in? So their interests, and then we can now say we can start off with a label. So that is a label for let's say I want to record is a user who likes coding. So we can just say coding, and then I add an input on it and say now the input is the type is we have said checkbox, so the type becomes checkbox. The type is checkbox, and the name can be what user is picking there, and the ID still can be the same, can be coding, and then we also add the value. So we add the value there, which is coding. We can duplicate this a number of times again and see what we are going to get. So, sorry. So I can take the label and the input and just duplicate them like 3 or 4 times, and now change this to a given different fields now. So apart from coding, let's say this user likes singing. So I can do, I can say singing. So this likes singing instead of coding, so that is singing. Then we can also have another one. This one we can say now likes dancing. So that one goes for dancing. We can change this to capital D. And then the last one, is it the last one? Yeah, the last one we can now change this to, maybe this one in their free time they like going swimming. So you can say swimming. So this one likes swimming. So we have our like 4 fields there with those different values done there. So we can now check and see. We said with the radio buttons you only select one. If you pick the other one, only that one. So this one picked one, but with the interest you can see with radio button with the checkboxes, I can check out this, check out the next one, check out that. So you can check out as many as you can with the checkboxes. That is it on checkboxes, and then we can now look at another input we can use in our form, and this is now we talk of a select drop down. So a select drop down where a user can just get you click on the button. There's a drop down of a list where you can now select from. So this one we start off with the select. And before we do the select, we can just have a label. So a label that will going to indicate what we are going to select from. So the label, let's say here, I want users to select from a given list of countries. So I can just say label for country. Then here I can have the text country. So text country, and then we have said here we have now the select. So the select tag just gives us the select drop down that we want. So there the name can be a country. So we are selecting country. The ID can also be country. So we can just have country there, and then in the select tag, now we now bring in what we a tag called option. We now bring in the option. So the first one we can leave it blank and now just have a text in between saying select a country. So select a country, and then we can now have other options for different countries. So here, like the value can be USA, and then option here, we'll have the text United States. So we can just have United States, and then we can go to this one and now say this one can be, let's say, United Kingdom. United Kingdom. The value will also be UK, so we can just say UK. The value here can be the start one. The value can be, let's say, a country like which one? Canada. Then we can just say Canada. Sorry, we can just say Canada, and then we can go to the next one and say this one is, uh, let's say this one is France. And just have the value as France, and the last one now we can just say this one is just say Germany, and this one will now be Germany. With the select drop down, so I've given them a list here of options you can select from, and with the select drop down, you also just select a single element or item from the given list. So if I check out that now in our browser, you can now see we have select a country there. I click on the arrow down, you can see I can select United States, and that is what I've selected for myself. So that is to do with the select drop down. And we are aging towards the end, so let's look at now another very important aspect in forms called the we want the user to input some text in form that is a long text, that is prose writing, like want to submit a message. So a message field where I'm going to input a message that is going to be to take the tag text area. So as usual, we started off with a label. So that is label for, I've said message, so it will be message, and in there I'll say message. And then now the input here is not input as we have been doing with the others. This one now becomes, we call it text area. So the name can be or will be message as we are doing it, and then the ID can also be message. So that is to do with the text area. Then some other attribute we can add to it is define how many rows do we want by default. So by default we can say we want, let's say we want how many rows? 4 rows. How many columns do you want to have by default? So that is calls, so columns, and we can define by default, let's say maybe we want to have 50 columns on the form. So that is the text area, and we can now look at it. So you can see we have a nice field here which you can expand. So you can see it can expand and reduce as it goes, so you can see it. So very nice one there. Okay, that is to do with the text area. That is one way of rather, that's basically how we can do forms. a much more advanced way of now doing forms. We can now do another form here, and let's say we want to upload files. So forms for uploading files will be a bit different from what we did. So this one was just a submission form. So the action is submit. When we want to upload files, we need to have a form also, so we can use a form here, and then the action will now be upload. So we can add in the upload, and still we had the method. So our method will still be a post method because we want to upload a form, and then we also define another attribute here, which just does the encoding of our file. So we use the enc type. So the encoding type of the files we want to upload. So we can just take like multipart slash or form data. So it's just picking the form data, or when you take multipart, it will pick any type of form and do a submission of that form. So there we can now have a label. So we can just say label and then pass in that is label for a file, and then the text can be you can just say choose a file. So choose a file, then after the label we can have an input. So we can do an input. So the input type is file. So you can see how it's changing. So the input type is file, and we can pass in the name as file and the ID as file also. Then with that, we can now have the file done. When you go to your browser and check, so you can see telling you choose a file, and by default it tells you no file chosen because you haven't chosen any file. When you click on it, it will open your directory that has your files, so that you can select a file that you want to add. And when you add, so you see the file has been added there. So I have my file added. Then it will when I want to do a submission, not added an input for submission, it will submit that form, or rather that file, or the form with the file that I've just taken. Another advanced form element we'll talk about is a date picker. So I can have a date picker. So when I talk of the date picker, it just brings me a calendar where I can just pick a date from it. So I just say date picker. So date picker here, I'll just have let's have a label again. Label for date, and then the name. Um, Here I can just say date. Maybe we want the user to take in the date of birth. I can just say date of birth, and then have an input. So the input type will be date, and then the name can be date also, and then we can add the ID. Let's just call it maybe date of birth DOB. If we have that, then we can check our browser and see what we have. You can see I have date of birth, and against it I have a nice calendar popping up when I click on the calendar icon. So I can pick a date. I can pick a date in the past. I can pick a date in the future. So anytime, which is just a very nice way of just encoding that. Then another thing we can talk about is a range slider. We can talk about a range slider. So range slider here, the input takes the range as we talk about. This simulates like a volume slider where you can increase and reduce the volume as you slide on. So we can have a label here. So a label for, we can take, as I've talked of volume, so we can just say volume. And then have the text here and say volume. Then have the input. So the input type is now range. So we take in the range, and then the name. The name can be volume, because we are doing volume. The name can be volume, and the ID can still be the same volume. So this one now you can see with that. Now there are also other attributes we can add on it. The minimum volume. So what is the minimum when you slide to the start? Where do you want it to start? So we can start it at 0 and set a maximum. So we want to have a maximum, let's say, of 100 also there. Then you need to set also an attribute on the steps. So as you slide, how many steps will be skipped as it slides up. So I can have the step even as 1, so that as I move 1, 2, 3, it goes just like that, incremental. Then you can add a value on it. So the value is a default value of where the volume slider will by default be. So if I set it at 50, so that is a mid of, you see we had 0 and 100. So I set at 50, that will be midpoint by default. So if we go live and check, you now see we have a very nice volume slider which just has it at 50. I can slide back, I can slide it on to 100 like that. The nice one there. That is a volume slider. And then last thing we can talk about on forms for today is a field that is a color picker. So that is also another thing we can talk of is color picker. So this one we want to bring in, you want to select a color, so you can just have that from the input that will now give us the color. So label for color, and we can say the text here is color, and then we can have our input. So the input type, so the type is color. The name will also be color. And the ID, we can also have it as color. So just that, and voila, we are done. We check out that now, you can see what we have. So I can see I click on the color here, so I can see an edit button there. I can now select a color I want. Maybe I want red, so you can see I click on red, you see it's given me red back. So I can choose from the colors, HSL colors. I can select hexadecimal colors, RGB, and so on and so forth. So I can also have the range slide through that way. and select now whatever color I want. So I can do that. Okay, so that marks the end of our lesson today. Let's meet again in our next lesson. Bye bye.